Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Shifting from Efficient to Agile Supply Chains webinar sponsored and presented by Ultra Consultants and Argano. My name is Tim Green, and I'm one of the marketing managers for Ultra Consultants, and I'll be hosting the webinar. Before we get going, there are three things to know. Attendee phones will be muted for the duration of the presentation. Please feel free to send me a chat if you run into any technical difficulties during the event. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature. We'll address your questions during the Q&A segment at the end of the discussion. You can access both the chat and Q&A features of Zoom by placing your cursor over the bottom center of your webinar screen and clicking on the icons. Today's session will run for 45 minutes and end at 1:45 p.m. Central Time. We'll begin the webinar by introducing our panel and with brief overviews of their companies and services. And then we'll quickly move on to today's discussion on the broken supply chain, short and long-term solutions, best practices, and how modern supply chain technologies can ease the pain. Following the discussion, we'll preview additional resources that we will provide to you, then move on to Q&A for the remaining time. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. David Saunders is a senior consultant for Ultra Consultants. He has more than 25 years of experience helping mid-size and large manufacturing organizations and distribution companies leverage modern ERP technologies, optimize their operations, and accelerate their business processes. And Dale Robinick, who is principal for Argano SCMO2 and co-lead of the company's supply chain performance improvement practice. For more than 30 years, Dale has been an evangelist for digital business transformation, helping companies identify value through organization design, supply chain optimization, and technology alignment. Dale, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little more about Argano.
Thanks, Tim. Argano is a relatively new company. We are an organization that was created last year, and Argano has 6 joiner companies at the moment. Our primary focus is B2B space, where we help organizations through digital transformation. That ranges everything from CRM, CPQ activities, all the way through supply chain and the final analysis around enterprise performance management. We also have one of our joiner companies focusing on key B2C areas as well. Argano SCMO2 is the supply chain management organization within the Argano joiner company framework. And we're very excited about being here with you, Ultra Consultants, talking through supply chain.
Thanks, Dale. Now I get to tell you about Ultra Consultants. Ultra is an independent enterprise software consulting firm serving the manufacturing and distribution industries in North America and around the world, leveraging our ERP expertise, industry experience, today's best practices, and a rigorous methodology. We help organizations realize the bottom line benefits of modern enterprise technologies. Being independent, Being independent means we use a neutral fact-based structure to support the technology selection process and help our customers find the right solution for their industry, organization, and processes. And because we focus exclusively on manufacturing and distribution, we offer exceptional industry knowledge, nuanced insight, and a deep experience-based understanding of what's important and what isn't, and what works and what doesn't. To learn more about our business process improvement, enterprise technology selection, solution implementation management, and business value realization services, go to ultraconsultants.com. Okay, David and Dale, let's get to it. You ready to go?
Absolutely.
All right. So I think we can all agree that the global supply chain is broken and has been for a while, and looks like it will continue to be. What's happening, and why is it happening?
Yeah, so Tim, thanks for the introduction, and Dale, glad to be doing this in conjunction with you. And welcome everyone. There's a lot of press out there, a lot of discussions around the pandemic and did it cause the supply chain issues we're encountering? And from my perspective at least, the pandemic was really kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. But this has been something that in my mind has been building for a while. I know in our practice in working with our customers, there's a lot of talk about how do we become more efficient, because we're starting to have workforce shortages, and it's really kind of reflective of the aging out of the baby boomer generation, if you will. And then, just other things occurring, and what the pandemic did was really accelerate that. There was certainly, a large loss of life as a result of the pandemic, but there was also a lot of people who in their careers might have been at a point where we're deciding when do I want to retire, and they took the pandemic as an opportunity to accelerate that. So those areas that we were starting to feel for labor shortages, just the pandemic really just accelerated that. Now trying to come out of it, we're getting issues of, again, the effect of that workforce. I saw something, I think, from the American Truckers Association that indicated over the next 5 to 10 years that there was going to be a need for like 1 billion drivers. So, that's going to be really difficult to overcome. So, when we see the pictures of all those ships out in the ocean trying to get into Long Island and Los Angeles ports, the huge stacks of containers that are sitting on the docks it's just people, all of a sudden getting things and it gets to a bottleneck, and trying to get out of that bottleneck has really proven a problem, obviously. And then the other component of this is, we've been so focused on lean, that concept of lean. And I'm not saying lean is wrong. It absolutely is correct, and it's the right approach. But maybe we went over board in some of those capacities. So, we took inventory levels way down, not in, planning for, disturbances in the supply chain, if you will. And, the pandemic proved a huge unplanned disturbance, and people are just, have been forced to kind of react to that. And the other aspect for me is, the consumer spend. All of a sudden we had all these people working from home, and they need to go buy new technology, or they were now in their own space and they realized I don't like my desk, or other products that I want to upgrade it. So it was kind of a change in the buying patterns, which really helped it out. But I think, is it broken? I'm not sure broken is the right term, but is it challenged? Absolutely. And I know, Dale, when we had some of our earlier discussions on this topic, one of the things that you kept coming back to was the importance of the master data, and it's not static as many people think, but it needs to be reviewed. So, what are your thoughts on where we're at with the supply chain?
And David, thanks. Actually, Tim, if you'd be so kind, there is 2 slides I think that would be really helpful to use to help frame what I believe are the challenges we're wrestling with at the moment. First thing is the concept of, we talk about efficient supply chain, efficient operations. And I'm borrowing a methodology or a maturity model from Supply Chain Insights to kind of talk through this. And I think it's a fairly good way from an industry standard vantage point to talk about, what's efficient, what are we trying to get at? And if we talk about Agile, what we're really trying to get to. So if I think about efficient supply chain as a starting point, it's all right, I've done a pretty good job of managing my costs. I've thought about it in the context of my procure to pay and my order to cash cycle. And I want to smooth those 2 things out. How do I get the materials that I want into my operation? How do I convert them appropriately? And then distribute to whoever my customer is going to be. That's kind of like the basis. So if you think about that, that's kind of maturity level 1. Maturity level 2 is then kind of getting to the idea of a reliable supply chain. That's the idea of, do I have the right product in the right place at the right time at the right cost? And a lot of organizations have done a lot of work to be able to be both efficient and reliable. The third level is then moving into the context of a resilient supply chain or a resilient enterprise. And this is where now we're putting some technologies or strategies in play to be able to manage demand volatility and supply volatility. And we use different strategies to do that. More often than not, what we're using is the concept of safety stock. And David, to tie back to one of your comments, this is kind of where we start to think about, how do we manage a little bit. But resilient doesn't cut it in this particular environment. And that's where we're going to the concept of an agile or adaptive supply chain, which is then being able to think about what's happening and sense what's going on. Not that we would ever be able to predict COVID and the implications of COVID, but being able to respond to COVID and the implications of COVID. And the last one in the model is then having a market aligned or market driven supply chain where you're no longer thinking about it from an inside out perspective, but you're thinking about it from an outside in perspective. And this is when you are now working to build relationships up and down the supply chain where you're collaborating together. And there are several companies that, and several industries where this happens, but it is still more of the exception than the rule. So this is kind of how I view the whole idea of supply chain. And we certainly got efficiencies. Now the question is, how do we get to agile and or adaptive? If you would be so kind, Tim, to kind of go to the next slide then, which kind of frames it up. And, we think about it, what we're trying to accomplish is how do we get material from our suppliers, know what we need to buy or what we're going to manufacture, get it through our manufacturing operations, get it into distribution, get it from distribution through transportation into retail. And I'm just using a CPQ retail example as a model here. And the whole idea of efficient and reliable is effectively making sure that the connections between these pieces are done well. And what we've done is we've leaned out the model. We basically drained all of the inventory out of each of the different points. We've made everything just in time. Now we're able to run. But what are we trying to do now, or what do we need to do now? It's the thought process of how do we get to adaptive or resilient supply chains. Resilient in the context here is capacity for resistance and recovery, but adaptive is reacting to significant changes in structure, disruptions, or behavior. And I think adaptive is really where most organizations need to be thinking going forward. So to frame up my perspective, did COVID cause this? I think COVID as a pandemic triggered it. We had 3 months of worldwide shutdown, which basically stopped everybody from producing anything. We then went to government investment that said, here, we need to make sure, at least in the United States, that people are able to continue to live. They took that investment and they said, well, I can't go spend it on services, but I'm going to go spend it on product, which now creates a bubble required need. That gets pushed down the supply chain path. We then want to bring product back from China. That generates a problem in the supply chain. And we've got a bubble that's kind of flowing back and forth. And at this juncture, it's going to take a fair amount of time to have this process weed itself out.
So that's actually the next question. When will the global supply chain be fixed? Are we looking at 18 months, 2 years, 10 years, two days? What's the answer?
Well, David, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you've got a good crystal ball. I think that my partner in our supply chain performance improvement practice and I did a webinar around COVID, literally 2 weeks in, and we were using some lessons learned from a couple of companies we were doing work with at that particular point in time. And we thought, gee, maybe the shocks would last through the end of 2020 into 2021. I think we realized we underestimated that pretty significantly. I think based upon the analysis or that I've read and looking at the economist's normalcy index, we're probably 18 to 24 months away. End of 2022 probably is a reasonable place to be thinking about. And most things that I read is that at least in many sectors in the United States, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, I really heard, the worse than better part. I've heard that several times. Several have said that. Now, I think it's a difficult question to answer. Obviously, we don't have crystal balls. We think we're coming out of the pandemic, and then all of a sudden we get a new variation, and things start to get locked down again. But I guess really the question is, what's the definition of ending? Because in my mind, I think there is an aspect of, and Dale, you referred to the normalcy index. Well, what is normal going to be at some point in the future? It's not certainly going to be what it was before the pandemic, but what will it look like, and what really is ending? I think some segments are going to, let's call it, resolve their supply chain issues, get product in the warehouse, into the plant, be able to provide product to their customers. I think we'll see segments that are able to resolve that sooner rather than later. And there are certainly other ones that 18 to 24 months might actually end up being optimistic. But I think the 18 to 24 months is really a reasonable expectation, and something that we should be working towards. And Tim, I'm going to tackle the companies write it out.
Yeah, that's, there's going to be companies that are like, wow, that's really difficult to deal with. Can we just tough it out?
Yeah, and frankly, I guess you can always take that approach. I certainly don't think it is a recommended approach. I think in general, people need to be able to start looking at, and it kind of gets into your next question, but what can we do as a company to short and long term to overcome this situation that we're in? And again, if you go back to and thinking in terms of the pandemic, it was just kind of the needle that broke the camel's back, if you will, and not just the issue itself. That means that I can't keep doing things, I can't ignore it, because those things that we're dealing with are going to continue and really probably even get worse. And so I may be surviving today. That doesn't mean, and probably doesn't mean, I'm going to be able to survive tomorrow. So I'm very adamant that people need to take, proactive would have been before this ever occurred, but actively going after solutions to say, what can I do to mitigate today's issues I'm having with my supply chain, and understanding that there will be future disruptions, new disruptions, that how do we react to that? I don't know if you've got additional thoughts on that.
Well, I would say that if you're going to ride it out, the likelihood of your company being in as good a position as another organization that chose to be actively managing the problem will be very different. I think that there's a whole host of things that organizations need to be thinking about. Most have to think about it in one way, shape, or form. But I think that there's several things that, I would say fall into the category of leading practice that you need to be thinking about today. And it's going to be different by industry. Yep. But very first thing that I go back to is, companies don't compete. Supply chains compete. And you've got to, and you're not the only piece of the supply chain. And you've got to be thinking about how are you going to build the relationships with your vendors and your customers in an intelligent way, and actually have it be a partnership, so that your portion of the supply chain remains vibrant, strong, and maybe even give you an opportunity to take market share in an environment where everybody else needs to give market share. So I think you have to be proactive, and simply writing it out is not a particularly good path forward.
All right, so makes a nice segue to the next question. So yeah, let's get serious about solutions. what are some potential short-term and long-term solutions? What can companies do now, and what can they do for the future?
Dale, why don't you go ahead and start with that, because you already kind of started alluding to that in your answer, so I don't want to get in the way of
Okay.
that thought process.
There's a few things that kind of jump out at me. One is you might want to choose to be transparent with your partners and actually in the supply chain and truly be a partner. I think it's no longer practical for the concept of, sending out a RFI, RFP, saying all vendors are effectively equal and I'm competing on price to try to figure out how do I get the best deal. That's 2010 thinking. That's not 2021 thinking at this juncture. So I mean, very first thing is think about the relationships you have. That as a starting point one. Starting point two, and these are all short-term things. They're not things that take months or quarters to accomplish. They're things that you could be thinking about right now. Second thing is we need a way of being able to build buffers within our supply chain. There's going to continue to be shocks and disruptions. Right now, the primary buffering tool that we have is called inventory. And the question, and when we set inventory within the network, we think about it in the context of safety stock. That's one type of inventory management strategy that we would be thinking about. How do I buffer my raw materials from my supplier? How do I buffer in transit inventories? How do I buffer production inventories or cycling strategies for how often I'm going to manufacture something? Or I'm able to procure it and get it. So we're only thinking about one buffering strategy. We need to put all of them in play and how we want to manage, which then takes me to a third thought, which is, we've designed our supply chains and we've laid them out, and we might have done great network modeling and come up with what the right way to flow the material through the network to get to your customer in a given location is. We set that up, we did the analysis, we got all the data, and then we loaded it into the ERP system, and that became our master data. And none of that, we think about in the context of changing it ever. And in reality, that all needs to be considered dynamic data. And we need to be thinking about resetting what the transport times are coming from China into a port, into the port, through the port, into a DC. I suspect in every company that is listening to this webinar right now, all of your lead times are set for what it was a year ago in your ERP system. Think about going in and making those adjustments. Now we're going to start to have a bit of a dynamic model we can work with going forward. So those are a few that I would think about to start.
Yeah, and Dale, I just kind of build on those, and I totally 100% agree with those three. I also look at, from a kind of a strategy perspective, there are things that, building on your vendors, your key partners, is have you developed a stratification of your vendors and truly understand there are some that are really super important because they provide a raw material or a component or a finished good that is extraordinarily profitable and it's core to your product offering. And do you have that collaborative relationship with them so that, if you talk win-win type of scenario, you both are transparent with each other, collaborating. And part of that discussion then extends into, and you had it on an earlier slide and talked briefly to it, is it's not just your primary suppliers and secondary suppliers, but it's their primary, secondary, tertiary suppliers. You've got to go all the way down because frankly, the auto industry, to me, this was a great example. I went shopping for a car not too long ago and all I kept hearing was, yeah, availability is very limited. Nothing's coming out of the plants. I'm thinking, okay, they're short of labor. The people are sick. Like, no, there's a microchip that our manufacturing companies haven't been able to get. And it's one chip manufacturer who's providing this to all the auto manufacturers. So everybody was being implicated by it. Okay, well, I know my part suppliers are, they're providing components. They're good. They're very reputable and there shouldn't be a risk there. But if you understood that there was a chip underneath it, that really was kind of that constraint. If you think of theory of constraints type of talk, that manufacturer then became the key constraint that if you had looked at it, and gets to one of my next points is, might you have looked at product design in a slightly different manner to say, wow, you know what, I've got my component designed with this specific chip, but maybe I should design it so it's flexible that with a minor change or I have a design, if that chip no longer becomes available, I can switch it to another chip manufacturer or a different, processor of some sort. So to me, it's that kind of getting in that relationship and the vendors, stratifying with them, having a key strategy. Do I put all my eggs in one bucket? Can I, have some secondary suppliers as backup? And as well as looking at product design to say, do I have flexibility to maybe change things? The other aspect for me on product design really comes into, do I want to have a product offering of, I make a shirt or something, and it's the exact same shirt, but I've got it in 50 different patterns. But frankly, 4 of those 50 patterns account for 80% of my sales. Well, do I have a strategy in place to say, well, maybe I don't want to offer all those other patterns and colors, but I always want to make sure I have stock of those 4. So back to your point, Dale, maybe I need to change the stocking requirements for those 4 shirts and patterns so that I've got increased stock for it. And maybe the other 48, if I can do my math right, 46, if I'm saying 50 patterns, I'll get it right yet. So is it that I either decide to no longer offer them, or just really cut back on my stocking for those, and if I'm out of it, then I've got a substitution that gets them back into one of the 4. So I think there is a lot that can be done short term to help kind of get you out of, or at least put you in a better position to come out of probably the issues that many of us are facing today in our supply chain.
From a short-term vantage point, I think we covered off a few of them. I mean, and I think these are important. If I were to think about it kind of transitioning a little bit longer term, I think then we start thinking about, all right, and you mentioned a few of them, and I think it's a little bit harder to be able to implement. I have suppliers. Can I rationalize a part so that I could get it from several suppliers? That becomes a little bit more of a, how do I design in resiliency or into my model? And those are things that absolutely need to happen all around the concept of product strategy, product rationalization, and design considerations. It also then kind of takes to the idea of, we've offshored a lot of stuff. Are we going to onshore? I don't know. I'm not sure if it was you that mentioned it while we were in a prep session, but the new term that I think is making the rounds is best shore. So where should you be sourcing going forward? These are the things that now you're going to take 6 months to 12, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months to get in place. But there are still things that need to be thought about in the context of, all right, I'm going to have dynamic shocks in the network. What do I need to do to dampen those shocks going forward? I did see, Tim, that there was a question in the chat. Do we want to tackle that as part of Q&A?
Yeah, we'll do that at the end.
Okay.
We'll do that. We've got a couple questions. So we actually covered off on best practices here. We've talked about a lot of ways, a lot of workarounds, and a lot of what's the best ways to get out of this issue. So I think we can move on to how can modern supply chain solutions and advanced technologies help ease the pain that everyone is feeling right now?
Yeah, so for me, because that's a lot of what we do is help our clients, look at those solutions. I think there are a lot of there's some solutions out there that people talk about, and I'm hopeful Dale will talk to them, things like control tower and digital twin, that kind of been out there. We keep hearing about, kind of under the umbrella of Industry 4.0, all the, the different technologies. And there are certain technologies that certainly we are seeing being implemented, real life demonstration. And then there are a couple others that, at least in theory, it sounds great, but maybe having a little bit difficulty getting off the ground. But I think that there is an opportunity once you, kind of know what your future is and know what direction you want to go. There is a lot of capability and solutions to help you get there. And artificial intelligence is always out there in the forefront of every conversation. What does machine learning look like, and how can that help you? For me, those two specifically are around how can I take computer processing and help you take all this data that you're capturing and can capture into a single system, if you will, single source of the truth, we refer to it as. What do I do with all that data that I'm collecting and making it actionable, information? I was just on a call with a client, and that was exactly the topic that we were talking about. Is they want to go out and start capturing all this market data, and it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do with this? And I think everyone needs to rely on those solutions to make it actionable. So I can collect all this data, but if I don't know what to do with it, and I don't find the trends and all that other stuff, it's just data, and there's not a lot I can do with that. But Dale, I think we talked, and I know you had a lot more insight into, I referenced the digital twin and the control tower. So I want to let you talk to that, because I think those are really important opportunities for individuals.
So I think about when we talk about modern supply chain solutions and advanced technologies, I kind of think about things in a couple of different buckets. And I do think that we are at the edge of a sea change of capability that we're just starting to get our hands around. And what's driving that is we now have ubiquitous computing availability and ubiquitous data storage available in the cloud. And it's a sea change capability going forward, which means there's a lot of the ideas we're kicking around here, the concept of a digital twin. I've been listening to that as an idea and talking about it as an idea for 10 or 15 years. I was reminded by an associate that said, the first digital twin was designed around Apollo 13. And you think about what happened in Apollo 13, and if you remember, it's the space shot that was to go to the moon and didn't. And there was a digital twin, or a twin, of every piece of equipment that was in space down on the ground. And we needed the solution for the 13-volt undercurrent that on how to turn things back on. And they were able to do that because they had they had a physical twin, and figure out how do you do something before you do it in reality. And the federal government had plenty of money. They built multiple of these, and that's one of the things that I think has been a challenge for organizations trying to tackle the concept of a digital twin. But what's changing now is we now can put these platforms or these technologies into the cloud. We're able to scale as necessary. We can design a duplicate of how I'm going to run the company or how I'm going to run the supply chain and be able to leverage it going forward. I think we're now at the point that we can absolutely take advantage of these concepts. We talked about control towers. Control towers, a similar thing. I mean, it's a concept that if you have a large supply chain, you've got a lot of money, you probably have got something that you've invested, but for the normal organization, not yet. And why? It's because we're not able to get to all the data necessary to be able to aggregate it up and see it. There's a whole host of companies that are, from a supply chain vantage point, that are now in the business of aggregating that information and being able to present it to a company, so that where your product is within the context of the supply chain. And there are several vendor technologies that are on the market that help enable that. So I think, not just within my four walls, but across the supply chain, we're starting to get an opportunity to apply some of these concepts. From the concept of AI, machine learning, I see that in the context of solving specific problems, being able to look through demand patterns and see what's happening, or map demand patterns for a company against foot traffic in a store, or those types of things going forward. Things that is difficult for us as a human to be able to synthesize, we can let machines do a pretty good job to tackle. So I think that these are some of the things that are on the horizon. Yeah. I will make one other comment, and I do think this is it's kind of important. I do view some of these technologies independently. There are transactional system technologies, ERP, and then there's planning system and modeling system technologies, which are supply chain solutions. Those are two different entities. They have two different uses. And I think you need to treat the two as independent, but transactional systems shouldn't be static. They need to take the dynamic information that you're modeling in your supply chain environment and push it back in to represent reality going forward.
Yeah, and that last comment is really good, Dale. And the one other comment I wanted to kind of add in is, easing the pain. I think one of the things that we've seen also as a result of the pandemic, everybody working from home, is the growth in technologies like Zoom and those other virtual things, where it's giving people, trading partners, the opportunity to really collaborate real time. And people are feeling more comfortable because now this has become kind of the norm in many instances of how we interact with each other. And I think prior to the kind of pandemic it was there. We had Teams, we had Zoom, we had WebEx out there for teleconferencing, but not used widely. But now it's my day, a lot of my day is spent on Teams or Zoom calls with my clients, and even taking tours of facilities, and so that it kind of removes some of that travel time, that lost unproductive time. But I think people are feeling more comfortable with the ability to conduct business, if you will, virtually. And I think that's a huge shift for us as a culture.
Well, I think one of the things that it does do is it demonstrates the concept of building a center of excellence around a capability, and then being able to leverage that center of excellence in a wide range of areas. I know we're a consulting company. We do systems integration work. We help companies, with supply chain problems. I'm doing coaching for teams in literally all around the world. I mean, I've got teams that are, and these are client teams that I'm doing the coaching for. I've got teams in Sweden that I'm doing this for, in Russia, in Eastern Europe, even in China and other places where we're having conversations. 10 years ago, I'd have to fly to have that conversation, and it would, in order for that group to be able to get the experience base that we as an organization have, would be almost impossible. And I think that it certainly has changed the dynamic. And it's something that companies now can say, all right, I got an expert in a given area, and they happen to be based in Germany, but I don't have to bring them to the United States to solve the problem. It is a game changer, no question about it.
Yep.
Okay, we're a little tight on time, and I want to make sure we get to the Q&A here. We do have a couple of questions. Thanks, Dale and David. So we'll move on to Q&A in a second. And there's still time to submit your questions. If you have a question, you can access the Q&A feature by hovering your cursor over the bottom center of your webinar screen and clicking on the Q&A icon. As promised, we'll be sharing some additional resources with everyone who is on this call in a follow-up email later today, maybe early tomorrow. The webinar recording and links to two informative blog posts from Ultra and Argano about resilient supply chain strategies, and a link to our latest ebook, The Comprehensive ERP Success Guide. And so let's do the questions. This question goes back to the beginning of the conversation. In the U.S., can the infrastructure, the transportation and supply chain infrastructure, dig itself out of this mess? Port capacity and lack of truck drivers, lack of trailers, that sort of thing. Is that a thing that's going to be hard to dig out of?
The answer is yes, we will. The question is how long? And I was having a conversation with one of the 3PLs that we do some work with, and one of their customers had orders for the chassis, 150 chassis on order for the better part of a year, just so that they could be able to move more containers in and out of ports. So I mean, it's all up and down the supply chain, but slowly but surely, what's going to happen is that I think about it in the context of theory of constraints, just like David mentioned earlier. The constraints going to move back and forth as we do have a fairly smart group of people that are working to solve this. They're heavily incented to figure out how to make it work. It's going to happen over time. But yes, I mean, port capacities are an issue. In Savannah, there is an investment going on that just doubled the amount of rail capacity leaving the Savannah port. They put in space to store another 14,000 containers. There are things that are occurring. The infrastructure bill has has 50 billion funded in this given area that could be applied across the board. So I think there's a whole bunch of things that can end up occurring.
All right.
And I would agree with Dale, from the perspective, but I always think of the creativity that the U.S. always seems to bring to bear on problems, right? So we've got a problem as a society. We'll get real creative to fix it. It will get fixed. How soon? That's a good question. They had a story on 60 Minutes highlighting this whole discussion about the ports in Los Angeles and Long Beach, and they said part of the problem is, they're starting to get a little finger pointing, but eventually the players are starting to talk about how do we get out of this, because it's to everybody's benefit to get out of it. So it'll take time, but yes, they will find a way out.
All right, we have time for one more question, and actually it's an interesting one, a good question to end on. So the question is, so you guys have thrown out a bunch of possible solutions and workarounds. What are the three that are the most important? What are the priorities?
Let me give mine, and then David, you can come back and either agree or augment them. I think number one is you've got to treat everybody in your supply chain as a partner, and with respect and integrity, and be truthful and honest with what your needs are, and expect that they're going to be truthful and honest with what their needs are, so that you can collaboratively make it work. That's number one. Number two is don't treat your network as a static item. It's a dynamic item, and you need to treat that, you need to take that dynamicism, however I might say that word, and adjust your master data in your transactional systems to reflect it. And I'd say the third one is the serenity prayer. You've heard, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There's a lot that you as an organization or you as a person aren't going to be able to fix in the supply chain. Pick your battles intelligently. Put your force into making those work well, and invest a lot of time understanding which you can make a difference on and which you can't make a difference on. And I think those would be my three things I would suggest.
Yeah, and I keep the prayer close at hand at all times, just to remind me there are things I can control, go for it. Things I can't, let go. I think, piggybacking off the first point about, transparency in a collaborative relationship, the trading partners, it's not only with your suppliers, but it's with your customers as well. They want your honest feedback. And, if you're telling, depending what industry, and especially if you're not going to have something ready for them when they need it, you need to tell them up front, just so that they know. Because just went through this with a client recently, and they're really looking for, okay, I know there's a backlog, I know there are issues getting supplies. If you're not going to get it, great, tell me as soon as you know. Don't wait to the week before you were going to ship it and then communicate to me, oh, by the way, it's really going to be another 2 months. That's just terrible. So that transparency is really, really critical, and it does build trust, which is important. And for me, I guess maybe my third one would be, step back and look at your business strategically, and think about those things that we want to focus on, and start to put a plan in place for achieving them and working forward, so that you can solidify your supply chain and your ability to serve your customers.
All right. Excellent. Good questions, good answers. Let's move. We need to wrap this up. So that concludes the webinar for all of us at Ultra and Argano, and for Dave Saunders and Dale Rabinek. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope we see you again soon at our next webinar. Thanks, Dale. Thanks, David.
Appreciate
Thanks,
the
everyone.
opportunity. Bye-bye.